Let me start with you, Leon, because I think it's very interesting to just start off from a foundational perspective, because every time I hear of the Reserve Bank, I kind of shrink in terms of my nervousness because I think of repo rates, I think of all sorts of terrible things that I personally have to pay for, and probably I never want to hear from the Reserve Bank as an ordinary citizen. But let's just lay down the foundations in terms of what is the function of the Reserve Bank and what is it supposed to do, because we're going to move on to the shareholder composition after that, because I also want to let our listeners understand that perspective in itself. But what's the function of the Reserve Bank? Let's start there, Leon.
Yes, it's really governed by Section 223, 224, 225 of the Constitution, and it's really quite simple and straightforward, and nationalizing it, if it honors its constitutional obligations, should make no difference, because its constitutional obligation is to protect the value of the currency. And in order to do that, it has some subsidiary functions. One of them, for example, is to hold the government's reserves, on which it earns very handsome profits, something like 400 billion a year, to see that banks are prudential, that other banks are viable, and, for example, to blow the alarm when VBS bank goes off the rails, and finally to convert rands to dollars. Those secondary functions, by the way, my own view is it shouldn't perform them, but it does, and it's not entirely clear that that's consistent with its constitutional mandate. But let's make it very simple, straightforward. The Constitution says it has one purpose and one purpose only, and a few maybe subsidiary ones under the Reserve Bank Act, and that is to protect the value of the currency. In other words, to keep the rand at its current value. It has, by the way, completely failed doing that. The rand has fallen 95% since, the 1980s. So it's failed at that function. But that's its job. It should be and also, the Constitution says, by the way, just to add this, finally make this point, that regardless of who owns it, it has to perform its functions, and I quote, independently and without fear, favor, or prejudice. All it has to do, the only political role it has to play is that it must have regular, the words are quote unquote, regular consultations with the Minister of Finance. But for that, it has to be independent without fear, favor, or prejudice. The objective of wanting to nationalize it is to completely change its function so that it will be politically controlled. In other words, to do anything as is proposed, it would have to have a constitutional amendment. And if you really want to frighten foreign investors and local investors and put the final nails in the South Africa's economy coffin, then what you do is you amend the Constitution to say the Reserve Bank is no longer independent and its function is no longer to protect the value of the currency. Okay. And that is the ideological agenda behind this proposal.